Now again, attached you find a starting project, which gives you this page essentially. It's a little dummy application where you can keep a list of your friends around and store the phone number and email address of your friends. It's just a dummy application, but it will allow us to explore the concept of components. Now, if we inspect the code for this, we got an index.html file with some markup, to be precise with an unordered list that holds the two friend list items, so one list item per friend, and then we have a nested list in every friend with the phone and email number. We got the name, we got a button which currently does nothing, and important, we also got an empty app.js file, so no Vue app at all. And now it would not be totally unrealistic that this should be managed as one app, and we maybe don't want to hard code this friend data into the HTML code, but instead we want to keep that friend data around in our Vue code, in our Vue application. And we don't want to hard code those list items into the HTML code, but we want to render those list items dynamically with Vue.js. And it turns out that with the knowledge we gained thus far, that is possible, but actually has some tricky elements to it. But let's try implementing this with what we learned thus far. So in the app.js file, I'm going to create a new Vue app with Vue create app. And of course, we're going to mount this to control a part of the DOM with it. And here I want to control this section, which has an ID of app. So let's target this with this ID selector here. And now let's say we want to implement this by adding some data here. And actually in here, we have our friends property, which should be an array full of data about our friends. And each friend could be represented by an object where we, for example, have an ID, Manuel, for example, then a name field, Manuel Lawrence for my friend Manuel here, a phone field with that imaginary phone number. You can try calling it, maybe you get someone there, but I just made that number up, and the email address, which of course also is fictionary. So let's store that as well. And with that, we would have an entry for Manuel. Now let's add a second one for Julie. So here we have Julie Jones. We can grab her imaginary phone number and store that here, and also grab her imaginary email address and store that here. And now we have that data managed in JavaScript. And as before in the course, that is a scenario you will typically have. That could be data which you fetched from a database. It could be data which the user entered. You will rarely have websites where you hard code data like this into the HTML code. That's why this approach, which we had here initially, is not very realistic, and why we instead might want to use Vue. Also, to, for example, make this button work and ensure that we only show our details here with the phone number and the email if the button is pressed. So therefore, now we have that data. With that data, we can delete one of the two list items and then use v-for here, as we learned it, to go through all the friends in this friends data property. So in this data property which holds this array. So we're looping through these two array elements now. And therefore now inside of this list item, inside of v-for, we can now interpolate friend.name, for example. Here, for the phone number, we can output, with double curly braces, friend.phone. And instead of the email address, we can output friend.email. And we can also assign a key here and bind it dynamically to friend.id, because we have that ID field on every friend entry. And with that, if we save all that and reload, we get the same as before, but now with less HTML code leveraging Vue. But the Show Details button is not working, and that's the part where it gets tricky. Of course, we could add methods here, and then add a method which we could call toggle details, which should be connected to the button, and we want to show the details if they're not currently visible and hide them if they were visible. So we could add a second data property, details are visible, which initially, let's say, is false, to initially not show them. And then here in toggle details, we set details are visible to what they're currently not, to basically invert the value, as we also did it many times before. And with that, we can go back to the HTML code and connect that button. Upon a click, I want to trigger toggle details. So I want to execute this newly added method here. And then we get that details are visible property, which we can use with VIF on this unordered list to control whether that list should be shown, so whether it should be added to the DOM or not. We can then even replace this label on the button dynamically by checking if details are visible, and if they are, the button should say hide details and only otherwise say show details. And of course, we could also use a computed property here, but I want to keep this simple and to the point, so I will not do it here. If we now reload, we get the button. But the problem is, no matter on which friend we press the button, we always show the details, or hide the details, of all friends. And it should be obvious why that happens. With v-for, we output multiple list items here, one for every friend. But the button always points at the same method. So every button for every friend gets the same event handler. It points at the same method. So no matter which button on which friend we press, we always call the same method, and we just have details are visible here, which is just one property that controls the visibility of the details in both contexts. Now, there would be workarounds. We could pass the ID here to toggle details. We could forward the friend ID to toggle details. And then inside of toggle details, we could expect that ID and now manage two properties. Details are visible A, details are visible B, and we could try to make it work with properties like that. But still, it would be very cumbersome. I'm not sure how we would make it work with VIF to find out on which friend we are here. So ultimately, this is not what we want to do. I also don't even want to get started with having A, B, C, and whatever here, because this list may grow dynamically. It doesn't in this application because it's a simple one, but if you allow users to add new friends, you can't anticipate how many properties you'll need to toggle the visibility of the details. So this will lead nowhere, and therefore I'll revert this here. This is not how I want to solve that. Instead, that's exactly the kind of problem we can solve with components. So let's see what components are, how we create them, and how we work with them.